and welcome to Tech Talks, the People and Planet podcast. On this episode, I'm joined by Mark Stevenson, Chief Impact Officer at climate tech startup Curate. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hello there. How am I? I'm too busy, is how I am. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Pretty good. Right, Mark, for the benefit of our listeners who perhaps aren't as aware of your work, you're a writer, a speaker, advisor. You're even a stand-up comic and a bit of a rock star as well.
Yeah.
Give us a bit of an overview of your background and how you've managed to get yourself into climate change.
Oh my God. There's a very long version. There's a short version. I'll try and do something in between. I spent the first 10 years of my life trying to be a professional musician. Got so far on that. My band invented crowdfunding. Band fell apart. Drummer went to jail. And then I decided to get a proper job. So I became a marketing director of a corporate firm. Hated that. Left by mutual consent. Asked myself what I really cared about. I really thought I cared about two things: systems literacy in all its forms. So people understanding how the world works in systems, either in the public discourse or in policy making. I thought there wasn't enough of that. And I also cared about battling cynicism, because I think cynicism is obedience. And people who bitch about what's wrong with the world, do nothing about changing it, say there's no point in changing it, and then dress that up as wisdom. It's like literally the most fucking useless people to exist. Yeah. So I thought I'd try and battle cynicism and I'd try and improve systems literacy in every avenue. I thought this was a communications issue and an emotional issue as much as a technical one. So I thought I would engage with the heart and soul of it. So I became a stand-up comedian doing comedy about systems. I would take gender inequality or climate change and see, can I communicate this in a non-trivial way to all comers? That I did pretty well at that. Got asked to write a book called An Optimist Tour of the Future, which did pretty well, got translated into 12 or 13 languages. As a result of that, I got asked to do a book tour. So you start talking about your book, and in the back of some of these rooms, in the back of some of these rooms was like, the CEO or the marketing manager of a corporate like, "Oh, you're pretty good at this talking thing. Would you come and talk at our conference?" And I'd go, "I don't know, how much do you pay for a corporate speech?" And then they'd show me. I go, "Fuck me, that's a lot more than stand-up. Yeah, I'll definitely do that." And so I started having this career sort of being a speaker, talking about the future, innovation, how to think about systems. Obviously, having been a stand-up and a musician, I was comfortable in front of an audience, so I was quite entertaining. And then they go, "God, this is really great, the stuff you've done. The staff are thinking differently. We feel inspired. Would you hang around? Would you be an advisor? Would you consult?" I said, "I don't know. How much do you pay for consultants?" And they showed me, and I went, "Yeah, I'll learn to do that." So I ended up sort of being this by accident, really, although sort of by design. Sort of what my friend Ed calls an insultant. In that I was very rude to my clients about the stuff that I thought that mattered. And because I'd gone that route, I wasn't in hock to any particular corporate, NGO, governmental, political agenda. I could just say, well, this is the straight dope as far as I see it, and this is how you need to think about it. So I ended up being special advisor to the Ministry of Defence on national security and climate change, where I consulted on the net zero strategy for the MOD. I'm an ambassador for Client Earth, the environmental law charity that took the British government to court on its net zero strategy. I've advised a whole bunch of companies on moving from extractive and non-systems thinking to circular regenerative systems thinking. So I've got some amazing clients doing that. But in the process of doing all that, I came to the conclusion, if I was going to be very rude to people about climate change in particular, I need to take my own climate house in order, my own, emissions and whatever.
Yeah, sure.
So I obviously set about reducing my emissions as much as possible, and then set out to remove the rest from the atmosphere, because the science says we've got to remove 220 gigatons by 2050 to maintain 1.5. And I found actually removing carbon from the atmosphere to be incredibly difficult, opaque, quite a lot of snake oil being sold, quite a lot of these things called offsets, which didn't actually remove my carbon, but charged me very little, as if I could claim that I'm somehow carbon neutral, whatever that meant. I got very confused, and I'm a pretty informed guy. I mean, this is the guy who's been consulting on the net zero strategy for the MOD, and etc. So I know what I'm talking about, and it was like, this is a nightmare. There doesn't appear to be an operating system to remove that carbon quick enough in a way that it stays down, in a way that is scientifically and legally verifiable for the planet. And if there isn't, then all of our reductions efforts are kind of pointless. So so I set about building that operating system along with my friend Dr. Gabrielle Walker. I challenged her to do the same thing. She found it difficult. and a lady called Marta Krupinska, who is a serial CEO, entrepreneur, and the ex-founder of head of Google startups in the UK. And a number of other people were very important in the genesis of this. Lady called Claire O'Neill, who sort of introduced us to the music industry, where we're doing a lot of work on helping them do carbon removed tools and whatever. So we're basically we're building that operating system in two ways. One, we have an NGO or not for profit that works on the policy side of things and the rule setting and trying to clear all that up because it's a bit of a mess. And then a commercial arm which basically creates tons of carbon removal for our corporate clients to buy that they can actually rely on and actually remove the carbon. So we take all that demand, we pump that money and that future demand into the market. That grows the market, reduces the cost, more people can afford it, and hopefully we get this operating system being rapidly grown. But we've got to do it, about 3 times as fast as we did it for solar. So that's the mission. And then when I'm not doing that, I'm back into playing music. Got a record deal. I'm a playwright, so I've got a couple of plays floating around that are going on in various places in the world. And I might be writing a third book if I can ever find the time. I've got 2 children, so I'm busy.
Busy guy. Busy guy. Well, so what's a chief impact officer? What does that role involve?
I don't know.
Sounds fancy.
The thing is, what we've realised at Curate is there is no real job title for what I do. In my mind, I call myself director of possibly dangerous and inadvisable things. What I really am, in all of the fields I work and for Curate, is basically a serendipity engine. So what I'm doing is going around thinking, okay, who needs to be connected to who to think about what to accelerate the transition to a more just, sustainable and equitable world. And, so that might, so for instance, I've just had a text from Tim Schmidt, the guy who set the Eden Project, and we've been doing a bit of work together, but I'm connected him to another friend of mine who's doing some interesting stuff in the private finance world. I advise a bunch of investment firms, like several, I think I advise about 20 billion of investments on sustainability and climate change and social justice. And often it's just a matter of going like, you need to talk to that person over there. And it's often a link of like, okay, policy, technology, art, culture, whatever, and going like, how do I mix those things together in a way that will have maximum and fastest effect on making the world a bit less shit?
Yeah.
So I don't know what the job title of that is. I think insultant's not bad. I say unemployable dilettante, corporate irritant. I don't know.
All of those. Chief impact officer sounds a little bit more PC, but
yeah.
So Curate seems to be going well. You've raised 5.3 mil recently. What's your plans? Anything exciting that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, it was an amazing fundraise led by Google Ventures, which is pretty unheard of for them to invest at this level. They kind of broke on most of their rules to invest in us. And I think that's down to 2 things. One, it's down to the amazing Marta Krupinska, our CEO, because obviously she is a bit of a celebrity CEO, and therefore when she gets involved in something, investors take note. And so we were able to attract some proper tier 1, as they call them, investors at an early stage. But also because the whole world's waking up to the fact that the legal definition of net zero is you have to remove, not offset, you have to remove what's left. We've now got so much interest because we have to do it from a moral perspective, otherwise the planet burns. We have to do it from a legal compliance perspective because of all the net zero legislation that's coming. And that obviously translates into commercial imperative for organizations to get themselves to net zero and remove carbon. So that's why we are growing so rapidly and why we're hiring like crazy. I mean, the basic premise is we're gonna crack on doing what we're doing, which is helping our clients understand their journey to net zero, helping grow the supply side, because if we can bring demand, we can de-risk the building of supply by helping investment come into that space, or by giving some of these younger companies customers 5 or 6 years into the future. And basically it's just accelerate and try and have some fun while we're doing it. We want to catalyze. I don't really see ourselves as a commercial organization, although of course we are. What we really are is a market making exercise. So we've just hired a whole marketing team. We're just about to launch our online portal, customer portal, where you can see your carbon being managed and how that's being drawn down. Who is your client base at the moment? Are you targeting anyone in particular? Well, no, I mean, not really. I mean, we have got a few market segments that we seem to be doing a lot of work in, music being one in particular, and entertainment and events. And I think that's largely down to sort of my background as a musician and the wonderful Claire O'Neill, who I mentioned earlier, who does a lot of consultancy in that area. But we did think there would be a very obvious initial customer base, because removing carbon is expensive, right? It's not like offsetting, it's expensive. So we thought initially it would be high profit per ton companies, so software companies, etc. Maybe law firms. Don't have a huge amount of emissions, but they do make quite a lot of money. So we thought it initially, but then it turns out that's not true at all. We do have some of those. The only thing I could say that links all of our customers, and some of them are very low margin businesses, which we thought wouldn't be able to go near this. But the only thing that seems to link them is at a board level, the CEO or somebody on that board, and maybe one or two people, understand the need to do this from both a moral and compliance. Sorry, both from a moral, compliance, and commercial perspective. They get it. There's an enlightened executive that not only takes it seriously from a moral issue, but also goes, if I don't get ahead of this net zero stuff, I ain't going to be getting hired. I'm going to be on the wrong side of the law. And they're ahead of that game probably by about 2 or 3 years from other people. And we have enough of those that that we don't. We're not worried.
You find the cultural shift is changing, like moving towards actually I need to get my ducks in a row here.
Yeah, I think it's definitely shifted. I think one of the things that's happened that nobody can avoid is that COVID and the war in Ukraine gave everybody a lesson in my specialism, which is systems thinking and systems change. Suddenly the fragility of the world became very obvious. As we record this, Greece is on fire. Last year, houses were burning down in London. People, I'm working a lot in the music industry. I've literally talked to 3 artists this week who have had to cancel gigs on their tour because the heat was too much or there was flooding, depending on where they were in the world. So this is really affecting people now, and therefore they've kind of woken up to the need to. They feel it, and I always say that you can't convince people to do things. It never works. But if you get them to feel differently, then they'll do things. And people have started to feel differently, and they've started to call time. Not enough, not quick enough. We're way too late to the game. We've lost a lot when it comes to climate already. But certainly you're seeing a number of enlightened executives, investors, occasionally policymakers going, we've got to do something about this. The problem is it's too late. So, the game now is to make the world not as bad as it could be, because we've lost so much already. And there's a great quote from Winston Churchill. He said it about Americans. He said, the Americans are a wonderful people. They will always do the right thing when they've exhausted all other possibilities. And I think you could say that about the human race at the moment. We're kind of getting around to doing the right thing. 96% of the world's GDP is covered by a net zero target. We've got sustainable development goals. Legislation is moving in that direction. It's just we're 20, 30 years too late because we're bloody useless at thinking long term as a species.
What more can be done? If in an ideal situation, more of the same, or?
Well, I tell you something that I think could be done. The legal definition of net zero is you have to remove what's left. Okay. Now, what we want to do is accelerate that as much as possible. We need to get as much money into reducing our emissions and then removing what's left. And reduction is the thing. Like, as a person who runs a carbon removals company with my co-founders, I'm not interested in working with customers that aren't reducing their emissions. We won't do that. You have to use the cost of the removal to act as a further incentive for you to reduce. But doing this transition in the current model is expensive. Now, that's madness because the current model doesn't take into account the operating systems of the planet, which is stupid. So the whole economics is broken. So the question is, how do you hack the economics such that the enlightened organizations that are going harder and faster on climate aren't unduly punished in the market? Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that could happen there, and I've thrown this idea into a few policy spaces, and indeed the Institute of Directors has kind of picked up on it and said it's a good idea, is what we probably could do with is a corporation tax that goes up or down depending on your performance against net zero. So there's new net zero legislation coming in from in the UK where you'll legally be required to do a net zero plan. Pretty soon that's going to be audited, and this is why KPMG and the rest are rubbing their hands with glee, because what's better than one compliance market? 2. And they, but what I would love to see is, okay, based on how you're doing against your plan, if you're sort of doing well or you're exceeding it, then we're going to reduce your corporation tax, maybe as low as 8%. And I think that works well because it accelerates, it plays well with the right because you're kind of doing lower corporation tax, which they like, which encourages entrepreneurship. And it plays well with the left because it's encouraging the right sort of entrepreneurship in the service of the planet as well as the economy.
I mean, makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course it makes perfect sense. Doesn't mean it'll happen. I mean, look at the human race.
Yeah, of course, yeah. It means it won't happen. Okay, last question. I've just literally just thought about now. And the everyday person, just like, you know, the potential the listeners to this, if they could do one thing in their lives to help this climate change, sustainability mission, around the, you know, in the personal lives, what would you recommend it would be?
Well, there's more than one thing, and I also think I would counsel against saying what is the one thing, because then people think that, you know, this is a fundamental societal shift. So the first thing you can, if there is one thing, it is to realize that we've got to change and we've got to talk about it. You know, the problem that I think a lot of people suffer from is they feel both complicit and helpless in the face of climate. And the thing is to actually just go and talk about it and be serious about it and talk about it at work and talk about it with your family, because when you talk about it, people start to feel that it's okay. I've been hanging out with Brian Eno quite a lot recently, and he's been quoting this thing, which I think is rather brilliant. He says there's two parts to revolution. There's the bit where everybody knows it's wrong. And he says there's a second bit, which is more important, where everybody knows that everybody knows it's wrong. And I think the more we talk about it, then the more action we'll do. But there are some very simple things. As an individual, if you're thinking just as an individual, as a person, you make a decision about the climate every time you have a meal. So if you're moving over to a more plant-based, less meat-intensive, less carbon-intensive diet, it's healthier for you. You can, you know, I mean, I always say, get yourself sexy, you know, exercise more, walk rather than take the car, you know, cycle, you know. So, you know, it's a win-win. Look at where your pension is. You know, the climate impact of your pension is probably far bigger than you realize, and talk to your IFA and say, I want this to be as climate positive as is feasible at the moment. And if they don't understand it, then get yourself a new financial advisor or a new pension firm, because that's got to move. Yeah, I think that's probably the three big things. And then if you can afford it, it makes sense to remove your carbon, start helping to accelerate that market. And next year, Curate will be launching a sort of an individual facing where you can have a subscription and remove the carbon that you're personally responsible for. Also, if you are an executive, stop bloody flying so much. Quite frankly, use Zoom more. You know, most of the flights taken by a very small number of people. So advocate for less flying. You know, we've got to have a lot less of some of the things we've taken for granted. You know, stop consuming so much. Stop buying so much stuff. You know, it's ridiculous. We don't need it. What was that great quote? You know, we buy things that we don't want to impress people we don't know, who really don't care that much anyway in the first place. So just get into the subject, the idea of less consumption and more love and more gratitude, you know, for the wonderful planet that we're on. You know, go into that mindset. You'll find you're happier. You'll find you're spending less money, and hopefully we might just get there.
Fingers crossed. Mark, thanks so much. Great advice. Great to talk to you as always. Mark Stevenson from Curate. And guys, if you'd enjoyed Mark's content, give us a like, a share, a follow. Help the algorithm. This has been Tech Talks, the People and Planet podcast. Mark, thanks again.
Thanks very much. Cheers.